Okay, in this video I'm going to be talking about what the examiner is looking for in the speaking test. And this is important to understand because in order to get a high score in IELTS, it's very important to know exactly what the examiner is looking for, and then once you know that, you know the skills that you need to practice and develop so that when you do your speaking test, you are ready to deliver exactly those things that will affect and improve your score. So let's get into it, shall we? And let's look at the factors that are being considered here. So basically there are four areas that the examiner is looking for, and these are the four main areas. Number one is fluency, number two is vocabulary, number three is grammar, and number four is pronunciation. So I'll talk about these in a bit more detail one by one. Let's begin with number one, shall we? And of course number one is fluency. So one of the key factors about fluency is this ability to keep going, to keep talking in English. And that means that if your answers to questions in the speaking test are just short, then you're not going to get a higher score. You need to say as much as you can. It's also a good idea to use conversational phrases. Conversational phrases might be, "What I mean to say, as I said before, moving on from my last point, related to this," all that kind of thing. And these are phrases really that show the connection between your ideas clearly and logically. Another aspect of fluency is linking words. So when I say linking words, these are things like so that, however, in order to, not only but also, that kind of thing. And then finally, pauses, hesitations, and repetition. Now, these are negative aspects of fluency, so you need to avoid the pauses, the hesitations, something like that, I don't know, those kind of phrases and pauses are a bad idea, and you need to practice and not use those. Okay, so number two is about vocabulary, and in a lot of these videos I talk about the importance of vocabulary. Certainly in the speaking test, if you want to get a high score, you need to show good use of vocabulary. So with vocabulary, we're talking about range, and range means using interesting words. I'll show you some examples in a minute. So it could be also using idiomatic expressions and also precise meaning. And then the other aspect of vocabulary is accuracy, making sure you do not make a mistake. So with accuracy, the vocabulary needs to be appropriate, and you need to watch out for the noun, verb, or adjective form and make sure that is correct. So let me give you an example of vocabulary here. Here, I was worried about my son's accident. And of course, I've highlighted the word worried. Now compare it to the second sentence where we have, I was distraught about my son's accident. So basically the sentences say the same thing, but the word distraught, which of course means worry, is a bit more interesting and more specific. So this is the kind of vocabulary that will score you extra points and increase your score. So let's look at an example of idiomatic expressions now. So you might say, I don't like cooking. Or you could say, cooking is not my cup of tea. So again, the second one has an idiomatic expression and shows that you can explain your ideas in a bit more complex and detailed way. So there are some examples of what I mean about using better vocabulary. Of course, there is no secret to this. I cannot suggest a list of magic vocabulary that will definitely increase your score, because it really depends on the ideas and opinions that you hold and what you want to say in your interview. And of course, this could be anything. So the vocabulary really is down to you. Now, I'd like to emphasize that vocabulary is one of the most important things, and you really do need to work on improving and developing your range of vocabulary, because without this you will not get a high score in the speaking test. So let me just suggest a few ways to grow and develop your vocabulary. So the first one here is to expose yourself to new vocabulary, and I suggest doing this through reading, because of course you have to find the words from somewhere, and reading is probably the best thing to do. So what I'm talking about here is spending about 10 or 15 minutes at least 4 or 5 times a week and reading in English. Now, you can read novels, you can read magazines, anything like that. However, I would suggest that you choose texts that are quite difficult. So for example, if you want to read The Economist, the National Geographic, something like that, they would be quite appropriate. So once you have decided on what you're going to read, step number 2 is to capture the new vocabulary in a notebook. You have to write down and make a record of the new vocabulary you find, because of course just finding and experiencing the new vocabulary is not going to get you there. You need to learn and you need to remember the vocabulary. It needs to be there in your head, ready to use in the speaking test. So get yourself a little notebook and a special exclusive place where you can write down all the vocabulary. This is important also. If you just write your vocabulary down in a piece of paper somewhere, you'll lose the paper. Whereas if you have your own notebook, then you can organize all the vocabulary in one place, and it becomes much easier to study and remember it. Okay, so once you've written it down, the next thing is to learn the new vocabulary, and there are some sub-steps here. So the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you review your list on a daily, weekly or monthly basis, because of course you're not going to remember the vocabulary the first time you meet it. You need to get it into your head. Another, and this is really a kind of old school way of learning vocabulary, is to test yourself. So once you have your list, you're building your list of new vocabulary, simply see how many of these words you can actually remember. Write down a list from memory, then go back to your vocabulary book and see how well you remembered. Another little trick you can use, and this trick will help you to remember new vocabulary more effectively, is to visualize the words. The visualization strategy is what it says. So all you need to do is look at your vocabulary item, think of a mental image that represents that vocabulary item, and then remember the image. Visualization is a very important strategy that most memory experts recommend, and there are many different visualization strategies. In fact, it's almost worth a separate training video for this. If you're interested, just have a look and you can research visualization and memory strategies in more detail. It's certainly worth looking at, and it will make it much easier and fun to remember new vocabulary. Okay, the third area in which the examiner is looking at is your grammar. Now, grammar is quite similar to vocabulary in that also range is important. So when we talk about the range of the grammar you use, here are some examples. You need to use complex sentences. So complex sentences are sentences using that, which, who, where, that kind of thing. Another example might be conditional sentences, i.e. sentences with if and will, or if and would, or maybe the third conditional with more complex tenses. And of course, another example of a wider range is to use different tenses. Of course, English is divided up into the past, present and future, and there are certainly for the past and present there are a number of different tenses that you can use to describe the time in which an event happened. And if you can use those tenses flexibly, then that is a key thing here. I would say that one of the key words related to your grammar score is about being flexible. And if you can show flexible use of grammar, that's the kind of thing that will increase your score. Now, the second aspect of grammar is accuracy. So with accuracy, you need to think about the number of mistakes. So of course, if you make many mistakes, your score is going to be lower. If you make fewer mistakes, your score will be higher. Now, I should say here that although the examiner is considering the number of mistakes, don't worry about giving perfect grammar. You can still get a high score and still make some mistakes. Okay, so it's not about perfect grammar here. Certainly you can get a high score and still make a number of different mistakes in your structure. The other point is whether the mistake is a big or a small mistake. And, you know, sometimes the mistakes can cause serious confusion, whereas other mistakes can cause only a little bit of confusion. So the examiner will consider that as well. Alright then, that's grammar, number 3. Let's move on to number 4. And number 4 is about pronunciation. Of course, this is a speaking test, so the examiner is going to be assessing how well you use pronunciation. Now, overall, basically the difference in a middle score is that you can speak English and be understood. And then a higher score is that you can speak English and you can use pronunciation to actually improve your communication effectiveness in English. So let me talk about some of the individual parts of pronunciation. Alright, so number 4 is about pronunciation. Of course, this is the speaking test, so you need to show that you can speak clearly with clear pronunciation. Now, if we're talking about, say, a Band 6 score, Band 6 basically means that you can speak in English and you can be understood most of the time. However, to get a higher score, you need to use the specific skills of pronunciation to add and improve your communication. So let me show you some of the specific skills that the examiner will be listening out for in your speaking test. So the first one here is rhythm, and rhythm really is about whether you speak fast or whether you speak slow. Let me show you an example here. So it might be I live in Singapore. So that would be a broken rhythm, whereas I live in Singapore would be a much stronger rhythm. The next one is which part of a sentence or which part of a word you stress. And of course that is important. Sometimes it can cause confusion if you stress the wrong part. Again, let me show you some examples here. So we've got photographer or photographer. And actually the second one is correct, the first one is wrong. And then with a sentence, you could stress any part of this sentence. So you could say cooking is fun, or you might stress the first word, cooking is fun, or you could say cooking is fun. Now here, the stress on the different words carries a different meaning and a different idea in your communication. So word stress is something that you use to emphasize your ideas. Okay, the next one then is intonation, and intonation is about the rising or falling tones in English. Often with rising tones, that's used to to show a positive attitude, whereas falling tones describe a negative attitude. So let me give you an example. Again, you might say cooking is fun with a rising intonation to show positive attitude. Or you might say in the negative, cooking isn't fun, with a falling intonation, and that kind of thing. So there. Now the next one is lastly the sounds of English and pronouncing individual sounds. So I've got some examples that often cause confusion here. T versus th, s versus sh, r versus l. That kind of thing. And there, of course, there are many other individual sounds in English. Now, pronunciation is a big area, and in this video I can't give a whole pronunciation course, but this shows you some of the areas that you need to practice. Certainly, if you want to improve your pronunciation, the best advice I can give is listen and repeat. Listen and repeat. Once again, there are the internet is a great source for this kind of thing, and you can also use online dictionaries. So sometimes you can just type in a sentence and you can get the sentence played back, and you can listen and you can try and repeat the sentence using the same pronunciation. So see if you can keep on doing that, and you'll improve a bit. Okay, anyway, there you go. That is the 4 areas that the examiner is looking for. So these are the 4 areas that you need to practice and work on improving. Number 1 is fluency, the ability to keep going and to show the connection between your ideas. Number 2 is using interesting vocabulary and communicating your ideas in a specific way. Number 3 is grammar, using a range of structures and cutting down on your mistakes. And then number 4 is pronunciation, not just speaking so that you can be understood, but using things like rhythm, stress, intonation, and the sounds to communicate your ideas more effectively. I hope this helps. If you've got any questions, then you can contact us. Thank you, and we'll move on to the next video now.